Hi, I'm Mimi Geerges. U.S. immigration agents went undercover to catch the man behind the largest human smuggling operation in history. And the immigrants pouring into the country aren't Mexicans, they're South Asians.
As an American, I took things for granted. We grew up in a sense that we have a great country, and until you've been in the back of a U-Haul or crossing the river where you almost drowned, you realize what people go through to come into the country.
Welcome to the Mimi Geerges Show. About 20 years ago, what was then called the INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, found out about a huge international human smuggling operation bringing mostly South Asians to the U.S. At the center of it all was this guy named Maan Singh. He would smuggle people illegally across the world into the United States and then to various cities around the country, charging an estimated $30,000 per person. And he frankly didn't care what they were trying to do once they got here, get a job or be a terrorist, as long as they paid up. So the Justice Department authorized Border Patrol agents to go undercover to try to catch this guy. Hipolito Acosta ran the operation, and he wrote about it along with fellow agent A.J. Irwin in a book called The Hunt for Maan Singh. Poli, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So how big a deal was this guy, Maan Singh?
Well, it was a huge deal. Number one, he had been operating for many, many years, and one of the very unique things about this was that Maan Singh was not in the United States. He was several thousand miles away from our border, but he was a major target. He was the head of the organization. He had been doing it for years. He was very successful. And one of the things that you just mentioned that was very important, he didn't care what the people were coming into the country for. Many were coming in to make a better way of life, to feed their families, but no one knows that every single individual was doing that. So there was a lot of different things, very unique, and he was based in South America. Niranjan Maan Singh was not a Hispanic, a Latin smuggler. He was actually a British citizen.
From India.
From India, who had been born in India.
And the people that he was bringing over, mostly Indians?
There was Indians, Pakistanis, Syrians, anybody who was willing to pay the $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 that it took to get to the United States.
So like how much money was he making?
Well, it's hard to say exactly how much money he was making himself, but when you figure that at any one time they could have 100 or 200 people in the pipeline, because remember that the people were coming in from Southeast Asia. You had people along the way coming through Russia, through Cuba, through the Bahamas, 200 people at any one time. If you multiply those figures, it gives you an idea there was a huge business.
This operation took place in the late 90s, but what kind of human smuggling is happening now?
Human smuggling continues to what it was back then. We had the same type of human smuggling. People are still trying to come into the country. We have tightened our security along the U.S.-Mexico border, but people are still coming in. People are still being successful. We have the same type of activity ongoing right now.
So can you give me some numbers, like how many people are coming in illegally?
Well, you know, when you look at the figures from 2014 showed that the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or their deportation branch, or the Border Patrol, actually returned 300 to 347,000 people that were expelled from the country, that were, many of them that were caught entering along the border. So you know that they're still coming in large numbers, Mimi.
The cases you were working on, people were coming in voluntarily, right? This was not a cases of human trafficking.
That's correct, but let's also understand one thing. When people are paying $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 to come to the United States, where are they going? How are they going to pay that money back? So there's a likelihood that people can be placed in that particular position. The initial intent might have been to come into the country to work, but work at what? How do you pay that off? And
especially because you don't have status.
Exactly.
So you can't work legally anyway.
That's correct. And you know, one of the things that also important to note, when you travel to places like New York, Chicago, some of those places, people working at convenience stores that are paying off those fees, are they there because they want to be, or do they have to be there because they have to pay off the smuggling fees?
So let's go through kind of how he and other smugglers got people from point A to the United States.
Okay, well, you know what? One of the things that we talk about Maan Singh, he'd been in business for about 20 years when we actually started working on the hunt for Maan Singh. He had actually been on a boatload of almost 200 immigrants that were coming into Canada that were arrested by Canadian authorities. But Maan Singh was able to, in one of the rare cases where he was actually with the group, he was able to pass himself off as one of the people being smuggled into the country. So consequently, he was released, moved for his operations, ultimately went into Belize, where he continued his operations and worked throughout South America, Central America, ultimately set up his operations in Ecuador. However, we also had what we had in this operation, the hawala laundering system, because you have to set up a scheme on how you pay the smuggling fees. How are those monies distributed? Maan Singh had people in the United States who would collect the fees. They would make sure that it was laundered or got back to the other members of the organization that were running the finances, and Maan Singh directed the operation from his location in Quito, Ecuador.
So let's say somebody somewhere in India wants to come to the United States, contacts some smuggler there, he flies to South America, somewhere in South America then? And then from there, is it overland? Like what's the route?
They had different routes, but I think that one of the things that you'll find that you have brokers in the United States and you have brokers in India, Pakistan, and some of those other countries, again, developed over a period of years. So you have people that leave, let's say Pakistan or India, travel into Russia. From Russia, they would travel into Cuba. From Cuba, they would travel into the Bahamas, or they would travel into Ecuador or Guatemala or Panama. Some of those countries were selected because there's corruption in those countries. It's easy to get access to some of the countries like Ecuador, and that was the reason that Maan Singh set up his last operation in Ecuador, because of the lax immigration entry requirements of the government of Ecuador.
And you mentioned corruption, so he could just pay off the police, he could pay off the people at the airport, and they would just let people go on in.
Well, for the most part, in many cases, they were in on the scheme with Maan Singh, as they have been with other smugglers as well.
All right, so let's talk about the operation, the undercover operation. How was it set up, and what the purpose was to find him, to catch him, to get information about him? What?
Well, interestingly enough, Maan Singh had been operating for years before we actually had a coordinated investigation on him. But what had happened was that one of his subordinates was a pilot that was actually smuggling people from the South Texas border into Dallas, into Oklahoma, and then they would be distributed to other parts of the country. Ironically, this pilot was building up his flying time so he could later on become a commercial pilot. So he found a way to get paid, smuggle people into the country, ultimately realized that he was making less money than some of the other smugglers, so he continued the operation, and he attempted to jump over some of the people that he was working with, and ultimately met with Maan Singh in Quito, Ecuador. This pilot became part of our investigation. He was arrested. He started giving us information.
And he always knew that he was doing something illegal, right?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no doubt. He knew exactly that he knew exactly what he was doing, but his purpose at that time was build up his flying time. And when he found out that he could make money at the same time,
make good money,
make very good money, and of course it was very attractive to him. That's how the investigation started. Ultimately, we set up a plan so we could submit it to the Department of Justice, so we could do an undercover operation targeting Maan Singh and other members of the organization, and that's how we got started.
Do you worry, Poli, that you making public the details of this undercover investigation will give valuable information to smugglers?
Well, there's no information in our book that's not known, that's not a public record. It's things that smugglers already know. Certainly, they are always wary, maybe, of having undercover agents infiltrate their organizations. And, I'm proud to say that in my book, The Hunt for Maan Singh, and my first book, The Shadow Catcher, I detail a lot of those operations. They're ongoing. Does it provide them a glimpse of how we operate? Probably so, but it's nothing that we're revealing that's a secret.
So the operation itself was called Seek and Keep, and you posed as a Mexican smuggler offering to move people for Maan Singh. How does that work? Do you actually go in and say, "Hi, I'm a smuggler. I'd like to work with you"?
Well, actually,
Really, I'm not an agent.
well, the first thing we need to do, of course, you set up a scheme. You get approval from the Department of Justice to get it done. But before we even did that, of course, we had already infiltrated his organization through the use of a confidential informant that knew Maan Singh personally. He introduced me to Maan Singh in Quito, Ecuador. I was the first U.S. agent that had ever laid eyes on Maan Singh, the first agent that actually had spoken to Maan Singh. The information was already known as to his activities, but nobody had ever gotten to that particular point. You know, it was a risky attempt because I had no backup in Quito, Ecuador. I was by myself. But we were ultimately successful in meeting with Niranjan Maan Singh in Quito, Ecuador. And later on, one of his proteges who became just as big as Maan Singh in the operation.
Yeah, this is Nick Diaz.
That's correct.
That's not his real name. He's actually an Indian guy. Tell us about him and what he was doing and how you were able to catch him.
Well, Nick Diaz, who was actually Nitin Shetty, was based in the Bahamas and Ecuador. He decided that after being smuggled himself by members of the Maan Singh organization, saw that there was profits in being made. He loved the operation. He actually came to the United States, was smuggled into Arizona and into California, ultimately went back into Quito, Ecuador, and became Maan Singh's biggest competitor. Nick was an excellent smuggler. He was organized, a very bright individual. He had actually started working as a human smuggler many years before being smuggled by Maan Singh, when he actually started getting some of his clients on ships, on Greek ships that he was able to provide counterfeit documents as seamen so they could get smuggled to the United States.
So how did you catch him?
Well, Nick Diaz, we also had one of our informants infiltrate his organization. He was very leery about meeting with me, but one of the things that was attractive, that I told him that I was a Mexican rancher with an airplane that we could use for smuggling. Nick himself, by the way, had a couple of pilots that were working for him in the Bahamas. He had people at the airport, corrupt officials working with him as well. And ultimately, that's the net that I had to infiltrate in the Bahamas. So on the one hand, I was dealing with Maan Singh, and on the other hand, I was dealing with Nick Diaz and telling both of them that I was dealing exclusively with them. So it was a little bit of a risky venture.
And they actually did work with you. So they sent you clients, so to speak, to get smuggled into the United States, and you actually moved people.
I did. Maan Singh's clients would be transported on American Airlines. Of course, we did the proper vetting. We got the proper permission from the Department of Justice to make sure that we had no terrorists that were infiltrating our country. And then we would meet them in Miami. As far as the Bahamas was concerned, I actually went to the Bahamas. I met with Nick Diaz. I met with his coordinator, an individual that we know as Gulu, that we mentioned in the hunt for Maan Singh. And we actually transported numerous clients for Nick Diaz that we used as witnesses against him when we took the operation down.
Was there at any point in this operation that you were actually in danger?
Well, I think there's always the danger of being recognized, and I had already been an agent for more than 20 years. I had done many undercover operations during that period of time. We had an issue in the Bahamas when an airport official attempted to stop our airplane from taking off. When we took Nick Diaz down, we learned that the officials, the Bahamian officials that had been assigned to us, had actually been on his payroll as well. They had not learned my identity until the tail end. And when Nick Diaz was actually arrested, we had to be escorted out of the country because we received information that some of his thugs were actually going to the hotel where we were staying to
kill
get
you.
at me and the agent that was my partner at the time.
Okay, so first you have to have evidence, you have to find the guy, but then you have to arrest him somehow, and he's in a foreign country. So how does that work?
Well, through our diplomatic mission, we had meetings with the top level officials of the Bahamian government. We actually went to an official who at one time was the Attorney General of the Bahamas, and she was very She was excellent in cooperating during our investigation, kept it very confidential, and ultimately they expelled Nick Diaz. We transported Nick Diaz to Miami on an airplane that I rented to get him to the country. But the official, we cannot arrest somebody in a foreign country, so we have to engender the cooperation of the foreign officials, and we did. A.J. Irwin, my partner, who was an excellent cool case agent with me on this case, had been meeting with our diplomatic mission. We had an excellent Deputy Chief of Mission, Pamela Bridgewater, who represented us in meetings with the Bahamian officials, and we were successful in getting him out of the country, as we were in getting Maan Singh later on out of Venezuela.
You talk in the book about all the bureaucracy and the infighting, the jealousies, one office trying to sabotage the whole operation. I mean, this doesn't give the American public a lot of confidence in our immigration services.
Well, I don't think it's just the immigration services. I think you find in-house bickering in all agencies, whether it's DEA or the FBI. I'm sure that they've gone through some of the same turmoil that we did during this operation. We have obstacles from within, Mimi, that unfortunately arise. We had agents that complained because they had not been allowed to participate in the case. We even had some agents that filed a discrimination complaint because they were Anglo agents that said they were not given the opportunity to work on the case, which
They're
is
like,
not
how come these Spanish-speaking guys get to do all the work in Central America?
Exactly, and we actually had a very diversified group. But we had those type of obstacles. We had an issue when I first presented the case for approval from the Undercover Review Committee denied our application for an operation, and we ultimately appealed the denial. That had never been done before, and we were successful in getting the Department of Justice to overturn their Undercover Review Committee and allow us, and the Undercover Review Committee had actually turned us down because they considered the case very risky, very dangerous for the people that we were dealing with outside the country, and ultimately we were able to get the approval that we needed.
Where is Maan Singh now?
Maan Singh, the last we heard, went back to England, and one of the good things about this case was that the purpose of an operation is to terminate the criminal activity. Maan Singh left human smuggling, he went back to England, and that we know of never went back into human smuggling.
But other people have replaced him. So, I mean, what impact did we ultimately have with this operation?
Well, it sends a strong message. Number one, I've mentioned to you before in one of the things that's important for me is that our security can never be compromised, and we have agents that work in and day out, trying to ensure the security of our country, and there is no doubt that other organizations, just like in drug smuggling, are going to pop up, but we are just as committed in securing our borders and keeping our country safe, and it was back then, and it is now.
In another undercover operation that you participated in, you posed as a migrant actually being smuggled. What was that experience like?
Actually, I did it many times, and what was unique during my first operation that I actually crossed the river by myself as I was being smuggled into the country. I almost drowned. And it was ironic. I was evading detection coming into my own country, and I almost drowned the first time around. On another occasion, I was actually in the back of a U-Haul with a number of migrants that had I not been being smuggled, they probably would have died because the smuggler was going to abandon them in a snowstorm in northern Texas. So it was challenging. It was very different in terms of being the first agent of the U.S. government to get smuggled from Mexico all the way to Chicago in order to identify the main smugglers. But that became a trademark of my career, Mimi, that I went after the biggest smugglers. I probably did more than 100 undercover operations throughout my career, and I'm glad to share that with the public. In my books, The Shadow Catcher and The Hunt for Maan Singh, and my third book, which, by the way, will be released in March of next year.
Let's talk about solutions. What do you think of the idea to build a wall between Mexico and the United States?
Well, I think that we should build the wall, but without having to construct the wall. And I think that's something that our leaders need to understand. Number one is that we have to find a solution by using commonsensical approaches to the immigration issue, which is complex, but we do have solutions. We should not build a wall per se, but we can construct a wall. We can build a wall without constructing one by enforcing immigration law. We need to give it the attention that it needs, and that's not what we're doing.
Are you saying more enforcement along the border? So just more bodies?
No, actually, we had in my view, we have the appropriate agents along the border, but the negligence in our immigration system has been never having an appropriate interior enforcement strategy or compliance. Employers are the magnet that attract people to come into the country, and for years and years, it's been neglected. Our leaders have never made it an issue of enforcing immigration law inside the United States. We have a large number of people that come into the country with visas that abuse their stay and don't leave. There's no strategy to go after those individuals. The audits that are done inside the United States are minimal. And as a consequence, employers take a chance that they're not going to be audited, and it's easier to make large profits and not worry about immigration enforcement.
So once they're here, do you think they should be deported? There should be a more robust process of deporting people that are here, whether they've overstayed their visas or they've been smuggled in somehow?
I think we should have been consistent, because what has happened is that we were the magnet that brought these people into the country. Once they got smuggled and beyond the borders of the United States, or they entered with visas, the likelihood of people being arrested and removed were minimal. And that's the case now. You have to recall that in 2001, it was estimated that we had about 3 million undocumented aliens in the United States. Right now, it's estimated there's 10 to 15 million, despite the fact that we went from 1,800 Border Patrol agents when I first joined the service to over 20,000 right now.
So obviously that's not the solution.
That's not
increasing
the
border patrol.
That's correct. I think that's a right step in securing our border, but we need to have comprehensive immigration enforcement. I think that our political leaders, from both parties, actually have used this as a political bouncing ball over the years, instead of being realistic and serious about doing the right thing.
To your knowledge, and I know that you've retired, but is the Border Patrol still going after these international smugglers that are outside the United States, bringing people in?
Well, as a whole, the agencies were broken up. Now you have Border Patrol became Customs and Border Protection. The investigations branch became ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I think that they still do some. Unfortunately, I think that when you have customs, it became a lesser priority, to be honest with you, as far as immigration enforcement is concerned. There is a strategy, of course. There are branches to go after some of these smugglers, but realistically, you haven't heard of a single case like the one I did in going after Maan Singh since back in 1998.
What's your family background, Poli, and how did you get into Border Patrol?
My grandparents were originally from Mexico. My parents were born in Texas. I grew up along the Texas-Mexico border. I didn't start speaking English until I was 6 years old, growing up on the border, but despite the fact that I was born in the United States. And I joined the U.S. Navy when I was 17, spent 4 years in the U.S. Navy, and 1 year after I left the military, I joined the U.S. Border Patrol.
And how did you feel when you did that first undercover operation?
It was rather unique. I had never given it much thought, and I think as an American, I took things for granted in the sense that we grew up in a sense that we have a great country, and until you've been in the back of a U-Haul or crossing the river where you almost drown, you realize what people go through to come into the country. I'm not saying it's the right thing, but I saw the desire of people to come into the country, and I remember a 16-year-old kid when I was in Mexico. We were in one room. There was 22 of us, and I asked him, why do you want to come to the United States? And he said, one of the things that I want to do is I want to join the military. When
The American military.
The American military, when I get to the United States, because I want to serve in the military and I want to be part of the United States. And I think there's still a lot of that feeling, despite the fact that a lot of things have changed. But you know, the United States is still the greatest country in the world.
As you look back, Paulie, on your very long years of service in this field, what are you most proud of?
Well, I believe that we were doing the right thing in enforcing the law that way it was supposed to be enforced, and I also believe that our nation is still a welcoming nation, and you know, we welcome people from throughout the world, and we try to do things right, and I'm very proud of the fact that you know, I still believe that we're the greatest country.
I believe that too, but we clearly have to work on our immigration problem because that's not going away.
I think that our political leaders need to do what's right for the country, not what's right for them. And if they pursue that goal, we can find the solutions and we can do the right thing. It's just a matter of making that particular decision.
Well, Paulie, thanks so much for being on the program. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure.
This has been the Mimi Geerges Show. You can see all of our programs on YouTube and WHUT.org. Connect with us on Facebook and Twitter and leave me your comments there. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me again next time.